Hello and welcome to The Price of Music, the show that looks at the money behind the music industry with me, Steve Lamack, and Music Ally's Head of Insight, Stuart Dredge. I always look forward to these episodes, and thanks to everyone who's been in touch. We're going to take some time to answer some of your questions. So without further ado, let's start with this one from Duncan McVeigh, who says, how much has Sophie Ellis-Bextor made from Murder on the Dance Floor? Now, Saltburn has given it a massive new lease of life. This is a little bit like the Killer's story, I think, that we were talking about the other day, how some songs never go away, and then at points will have a massive uptick in listenership. Like the Killer's track, Mr. Brightside, is going through a period where everyone seems to be listening to it again. And so all of a sudden, your income stream from that one big song returns to you out of the blue. Sophie Ellis-Bextor's Murder on the Dance Floor, though. Stuart, can you help us on this one?
Yeah, I can speculate. I mean, well, the short answer is loads of money. It's quite Harry Enfield. But yeah, so I started with Spotify, where it's had 504 million streams so far. I don't know what it had before Saltburn. That would be quite interesting to see how many there's new. But yeah, if they were all in the US, because that's where the royalties calculator I found is, that'd be more than $2.4 million of royalties for the recording and the publishing side of it. So that's so it's kind of multi-million to us. And then bear in mind, Spotify is a quarter of the market, so you could maybe times that by 4. So it's millions in terms of royalties. As with everything, that goes to a label and a publisher, and then gets split between people who wrote the song. And I don't know what kind of. I'd love to know what kind of deal Sophie Ellis-Bextor is on, but I'm not that nosy, so I don't know what percentage of that money she's seeing. But for a song you recorded in 2002, that's kind of good money.
Yeah.
I did also find a story, actually. I think it was Mail Online ran this story about how much money she'd made based on the financial accounts for a company, which is saying it pulled in $1.2 million last year with a $342,000 profit. But I had a look at those accounts, and they were for the year ended 31st of March, 2023. And Saltburn came out in November. So that's before, so there's no actual kind of public number, and we don't know how much the Saltburn people paid for the sync fee for the song.
Yeah.
And it's gone gangbusters on TikTok, and there may be some money there. And she signed a new record deal in January, and the fees she can come on for live performance will go up. So basically, and the US is open to her now. If she wants to go and do a tour of the US, she can come on bigger fees. So everything is up, which, to get unscientific and statty, I think it's brilliant, because Sophie Ellis-Bextor is like brilliant. Like, I loved her in the audience in their early days, and I love Groove Jet. I love this song, and she's one of those artists who's kind of done her own thing. Like from the kitchen disco she was doing in COVID to the music she made, she hasn't dived on trends, or she's just kind of gone through life doing stuff. And then there was a point when she was a massive pop star. Then there was a point when she was kind of less in the charts, but still doing good albums. She'd been doing stuff with Ed Harcourt for quite a few years. I loved. And now she's back, but it's one of those stories of kind of the comeback, if you call it that, where it's based upon just having written this great song. It's not about a hype or kind of, a one-hit wonder. It's about, this thing that was good. These filmmakers recognized it was good, and now things are on. So yeah, she's making loads of money, but more importantly, it's what she wants to do next is now. There's so many options now, depending on where she wants to go.
Yeah. Do we not? I didn't check. Did she write Murder on the Dance Floor, or was it one of the tracks which she's co-written or someone else has helped out with? Because that would then affect how much, once again, that she would make from the song. And yeah, as you say, all the streams and radio play, that's something else, isn't it? Which you can add into the equation as well. Once it ends up being back on rotation on Radio 2 or somewhere, that will make you a few bob too.
It was written by Greg Alexander and Sophie Ellis-Bextor. So Greg Alexander, obviously already making a decent amount of money for songwriting. So yeah, it's one of those things where, like you say, there are just so many different royalty streams, and we can talk about that in a little while. And they're all going up for her. And, I mean, I'm not sure. Was it a big hit in the US originally? I feel like she was very much a UK success in Europe, perhaps, but I'm not sure how big she was in America originally. But now she could go over there and do a tour, and that's where there's decent money.
I just love the fact that you managed to get in the a reference to the band that she started out in, The Audience. Yeah, I've loved her ever since she was in The Audience, way back. I'm no Johnny come lately. No, not me. I was there right at the start.
I used to go. Do you know the audience was a guy called Billy Reeves? So I don't know if you ever knew him or
Yeah,
came across him, but
yeah, I
and he
did.
used to run a club in London called Uncle Bob's Wedding Reception that a friend of mine also ran with him. So I was there, and so we saw the audience. It was one of the audience and the darkness are the two bands that I saw at Uncle Bob's Wedding Reception, who in different ways went on to be big. So that's the credit. It's not me spotting things early. It's Uncle Bob's to thank.
Another question. This one is from David Parker, who says, I work in a high street retailer that has an in house radio station. It's made up of store promos alongside music, which sounds like the popular sort of music that might be played by Radio 2, for example, but they're songs and artists that I'm not familiar with. For example, one of the songs played in is called Golden Wonderland. It's by an artist referred to on Spotify as Slowfly. Maybe they're a supergroup mashup of Slow Dive and McFly. Think about that. A boy band shoegaze. Actually, there's one for your collection of 3-word genre names that you love so much, Stuart. Boy band shoegaze. Anyway, David continues. Can you tell me what's going on and how does this work financially for the radio playing company and the artists, if the artists exist at all? Maybe there is just one person producing all this familiar sounding music. Yeah, maybe somebody's just used an AI tool, listened to Radio 2, and come up with all this music that they now get royalties for. What's the deal?
Yeah, it's Harry from McFly. All of it's him. Every single piece. Do you know? Do you know? It is interesting because if you're using a musical AI, you could say boy band shoegaze and see what it comes up with.
Okay,
I'm going to
there's
do
a
that after
challenge.
this show. I'll do it. We'll try. Yeah. So I was looking just because if you go to a record shop, whatever's being played is a person behind the counter going, "I'm playing this album for everyone coming in."
Mhm.
It's a personal decision. And I always kind of maybe thought that's how it would work in regular shops, but no, there's a whole sector of the industry specializing in in-store music. So there's companies. One's called Startle, one's called My In-Store Radio, one's called On Brand. These companies, their business is getting retail chains to say, right, we'll license you a station, we'll license you playlists, and they go into quite a lot of detail. Like they'll be like, we'll get music that fits your retailer's demographic and your brand identity, and we'll curate these playlists. So there's a whole industry behind it. Some of these companies provide licensed music and work with labels,
Mhm.
and there's a whole marketing thing there of if you've got an album coming out, you might do a deal with one of these companies to get it played in shops. So some of this stuff is regular music. But I looked up Slowfi and I found their profile on a company called Epidemic Sound,
Right.
who, for listeners who don't know them, it's one of the big production music libraries. So they make music to be used in TV shows, in games, by YouTubers, and seemingly now in stores. Um, so that's where a lot of this music. If you hear music and you can't quite place it, but it reminds you of someone, that will often come from a production library that has commissioned music for that purpose, so that people can use it who maybe can't afford to have the new the new Taylor Swift track, but they would like something that sounds in that vein. And there's a
Mm.
whole industry around that. So in terms of the money, it can vary, but often what happens, a production music company will pay an artist to create the song and they'll buy out their rights as part of it. So then they can license it royalty free to companies and say, right, pay us. But so the shop or the chain of shops will pay the production library or the provider who's sourcing music from them. And then that money will kind of have already been paid to the artist. So it would go to them. But what's happening now, and this is where it comes to looking them up on Spotify, some of these artists who are making production music, that music is also getting released on Spotify and on Apple Music and on streaming services, being released commercially, and finding listeners. And that might be because someone is in a shop and they Shazam the song and then go and add it to their library on Spotify. Or it might be because the algorithm just goes, well, you like Taylor Swift, so you might like this thing that's a bit like Taylor Swift. And Epidemic Sound, this particular company, they've talked about this, and they say actually when we put stuff on streaming services, we do give the artist a royalty. The artist earns royalties from streams of their song. So in that sense, Slowfly could be making money from having provide the music to the production company, but they'll also can make money when someone like David goes and listens to it on Spotify. There's another royalty stream there. So yeah, it's this kind of, it's like the industry behind the industry, and people can be a bit snobbish. Well, not people can be a bit snobbish about it and say, oh, it's just sound likes, which isn't just the case. It's not just a case of them trying to copy artists. It's often just like there are artists making music who, you know, there's a need for this. People can't, not everyone can afford to license commercial music, so there is a need for stuff that is in that vein. But it can be controversial as well, and people have like composers' bodies have criticised these companies because of they buy out the rights, and they say, well, you shouldn't do that. People should be able to retain their rights. So there's a whole bunch of debate around how this works. But yes, essentially, if you go into a shop, you hear something, and it's not specific songs by popular artists, it may well be some artists working in a studio for one of these companies, like Epidemic Sound, which are then working with these companies that license music for shops.
We at one stage on the radio show, we were struggling for music beds. That's the music which DJs talk over, and we found someone who said, "Well, I can make you some instrumental music for you to talk over, no problem at all. What sort of thing would you like?" And one of the references I gave them was, "I'd like something which is a bit like Babylon's Burning by the Ruts." And it came back, and it was Babylon's Burning by the Ruts. It's a bit like that Morecambe and Wise thing. It's all the right notes, just not in the right order. And it was like he just cut bits up and rearranged it, but it did exactly the job. It sounded like the Ruts. But in the end, and I think we used that for about 6 months before. By this point, I'd found a load of actual proper instrumentals by real artists, and we went back to using that. But yes, there are people out there who can replicate music in a way, or replicate the style of music very convincingly, I think.
The other thing I found actually that surprised me was the science of it all in in-store music, because it's not just here's some nice songs that people might like. It's like, because it's really music with a purpose, and the purpose is to make you buy stuff, to not drive you out of the store, to make you stay in the store. And there is all this science behind it, like what will the songs be that footfall is the word they use, isn't it? Footfall, yeah. People coming in. So it's very much not just something nice in the background. It's what is going to make more profits for the store. And that's the interesting thing. Like, how can music really spur that kind of activity, not just sound nice in the background?
Final question for this episode comes from Jack Walmsley, who says, would you please be able to explain a little bit about how royalties work and the different types of royalties? What are the different types of royalties, and are there different rates for different types? This is a great question. Thank you, Jack, because still, after all these years and all the stories that we've covered to date, I still get a right muddle about who collects what and who pays who, and what the difference is between PRS and PPL and MCPS. Stuart, can you set us straight? I know we could probably do an entire hour about royalty payments and the different types of royalty payments, but can you give us a sort of brief précis in layman's terms?
I was going to do an hour. Is that not the thing?
No,
I won't do an hour then, shall I?
You've got 10 minutes tops.
Okay, so look, thanks a lot, Jack, because it is an interesting question, and thanks a lot for the hospital pass, Steve. But so the short answer is actually go and Google MMF Song Royalties Guide, because the MMF is a manager's body, work with a company called CMU, which is a consultancy, and they've made this brilliant guide which breaks down royalties for managers, but it's understandable if you're an artist or a fan. And everything I say is going to be not as good as how they've broken it down. But yeah, I suppose to start at the beginning, there's two sets of music rights. There's recordings and there's songs. Ignoring stuff like personality rights, face, voice, which we're talking about a lot in terms of AI. But yeah, basically recordings and songs. So recordings is the recorded music industry. It's labels, distributors and artists. And songs is the music publishing industry and songwriters. And that's when it starts to get complicated. It's like a branching Venn diagram of marvelousness. So you've got royalties that are mechanical rights, which are for the reproduction and distribution of the music. Mm-hmm. And you've got performing rights, which are for the performance, the communication, and the making it available for people to use and listen to. And a stream, so if you stream a song, there's both those rights are in that. So the royalties from the stream were divided between those kind of rights. So yeah, if you're a streaming service paying royalties out, you have a certain amount of money, you have your pool of royalties, and you pay that to labels for the recordings and distributors for people who aren't on the label. You pay it to publishers and you pay it to collecting societies. And those entities, the middlemen, I guess you call them, they then will pay on that money. So a label will pay the money to the artists. Well, it will usually pay the money because if you're an artist and you've signed a contract and taken a big advance, you may have to pay that advance back before you get any royalties. In a publishing case, the royalties get shared between all the songwriters of a song. So some songs are written by one person, that's really easy. Some songs are written by 4, 5, 8, 9, 10 people. And that's the publisher's job, is to kind of, or the collecting side's job is to say, right, okay, 10% goes to that publisher for that songwriter. So it's basically like a branching diagram of like royalties paid out to these people, they divide it, and it goes on. So that's kind of the start of it all. You mentioned PRS and MCPS and PPL. All these acronyms of collecting societies that collect money and pay it out. Hopefully, they've got an explanation themselves. So PRS pay royalties for stuff that's broadcast on TV or radio, performed in public, whether that's a live concert or a recording and a DJ set, and streamed and downloaded. And a separate entity called MCPS pays royalties when music is sold as CDs and DVDs, streamed and downloaded, or used in film, TV, and radio. So it's like actually, this guide I referred to, the digital royalties guide, there are these amazing diagrams where you sort of see just lots of boxes and lots of acronyms. But if you boil it back down, publishing and recordings, and then it's split between the people involved. And we've talked about bands, haven't we, before, where you might have 4 people in a band and one of them is a songwriter. And so the band will share the recording royalties, but the publishing royalties will all go to that songwriter. But there are other bands who are more democratic. I think Pulp famously did this, didn't they? Where they just split the publishing royalties 5 ways, regardless of who wrote the songs. And there's probably less fights. So you can explain how royalties work, but then when it gets to the label and publisher, it depends on what the deal is with the band or the artist or the singer. And it also depends on the division of the work within that recording, within that song. So is that a good start? I mean, I get tangled up myself trying to say it.
That's good. That's good so far. Even I'm following this.
I mean, the other thing is that there's periodically talk about should there be new royalties, and so I touched on this. So we've been talking about AI music, and there's talk about creating these rights around your personality, your voice, your likeness. Well, you already have likeness rights. So in the future, there could be another way of royalties where if your music has been used to train an AI model, you may get a slice of the royalties from the money being created by that. So there's all kinds of, there's kind of basic royalties, and there's also these new things. People are talking about, for example, the metaverse, which was a real buzzword for the music industry last year. And now everyone's going, oh, not the metaverse. It's kind of been the hype has died a bit. But what royalty do you get if your music is being listened to within a game like Fortnite or a virtual world like Roblox? And there's arguments that that's just like a radio station. Your music's being performed, played in public to people. And other people say, no, it needs a new kind of... So there's always discussions about what's new. But yeah, it's it all comes down to the songs and the recordings, really.
And in answer to this part of Jack's question about are there different rates for different types, I guess it's quite difficult to work out. There's no one deal, is there? That fits all. So there are different rates, even within the payments of one of the collectors.
Yeah, and the other thing you'll see people talk about the per stream rate paid out by companies like Spotify and Apple Music and Deezer and Amazon Music. And you can actually find these tables online. It's like Apple pays this much per stream, Spotify pays this much, which is quite a bit less per stream. And people look at that and go, oh, so Apple's much better than Spotify, much nicer because they pay a higher royalty rate. And when you see that, the two things to think about are, one, Spotify's royalty rates are lower because that's a free service and the royalties are lower. So royalties for free streams are lower than royalties for people who are subscribing. So there's a difference there. And also, if you're an artist and you might get I don't know, you might get 50% of your streams from Spotify and 30% from Apple Music. So even though Spotify's rate is lower, you might still make more money from that service. So there's just so much nuance to all of this, and often you'll see this boiled down to this is better or this royalty is, and sometimes you see songwriters say, I got a 10 pence check from Spotify, and then it's always and if you're a songwriter, you're very much, you're able, you're right to kind of go, this is not on. But my question is always like, right, okay, let's understand this. So how much money was paid out? How did it get to you? And there's quite a long chain sometimes of where the money disappears en route.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things. It's the more I learn about it, the more confused I get, and also the more interested I am. The more fascinated I want to kind of understand it all, even while it's kind of just out of my reach. Because there's things like what's it called, neighboring rights and the royalties and that's still something I don't understand fully. And people say it, and I nod and go, "Yeah, I understand neighboring rights." So that might be a show one day to get someone on and explain it to us in layman's terms. But there's as an artist and a songwriter now, there's kind of almost an expectation that you understand all this stuff. And, it's my job to understand it, and I don't. So I really have sympathy for artists trying to get to grips with it all.
Jack, we'll give you that website address one more time. So if you've still got questions or there are bits of this topic which we haven't fully explored, you go to Stuart. What was it?
Yeah, so it's a series of guides called Dissecting the Digital Dollar. But if you search for MMF Song Royalties Guide, that's quite an easy way to get to it through Google. And they've got a bunch of guides, and it's all written for managers and for artists. So it's written as clearly as possible, and it's really good. So check that out.
And that's where we'll leave it for now. But we will be doing another of these in the next fortnight or so, I'm sure. So if we haven't got to your question yet, don't fret. And if you have a new question, if you've got a question of your own you'd like to ask, drop us a line. It is thepriceofmusicpodcast@gmail.com. And thank you very much for listening. Obviously, I always say this, but it really helps us out if you can give us a review and a rating for this podcast, and maybe tell a couple of friends about it as well. We'd be very grateful. Till next time, cheerio.